Dobie Picorni, The Man, the Myth, the Legend. Book 1. Temporary Insanity. By William Arthur Holmes. The Elevator. Dobie was on the elevator of a building he'd never been in before. It was climbing fast. Too fast. "It didn't stop on any of your floors," he said to the other passengers as it sped upward. When no one replied, he turned to see if anyone heard him. Apparently not. To his right stood an attractive blonde woman, 30-ish, in a blue blazer, matching skirt and white silk blouse. She avoided eye contact and clutched her purse with both hands. To his left stood a young couple, casually dressed, also mostly blue. The woman's long black hair hung down over most of her face. She was avoiding eye contact. Her muscle-bound boyfriend met Dobie's gaze with a glare. Dobie returned his attention to the elevator control panel. Was he the only one concerned that the elevator was not stopping on their floors? Hadn't these people pushed the buttons? The elevator increased speed as it continued upward. A knot formed in the pit of his stomach. It's going too fast. They were just a few floors below Dobie's, and the knot in his stomach cinched tighter and tighter. He fell to the floor, doubled over as if stabbed. Then the phone rang. What the? Embedded in the wall near his head was the elevator's emergency telephone. The ringing was so close and loud, he thought his eardrums would burst. The other passengers looked at him. "Aren't you going to answer it?" The blonde woman spoke for the group. "You're the closest." Through blurred vision, he saw everyone standing over him, waiting. The younger, dark-haired woman was shaking her head. With a clear view of her now from the floor, Dobie realized it was his girlfriend, Kim. Ex-girlfriend, rather, as of 2 weeks ago. Her new boyfriend was stretching his calves against one of the elevator walls. Athletic type. She always did like those. He turned and stared at the ringing phone and wondered what could possibly happen next. New assignment. He woke up. Whipping his head around to gather his bearings, he was relieved to be back in his apartment. His ex, Kim, was nowhere around. The sun leaked in through a gap in the curtains. Birds chirped happily outside his window. It was just another beautiful LA autumn day. Holding his aching stomach, he trudged toward the phone on the desk between the bed and bathroom of his tiny studio apartment. He cursed himself for drinking so much last night. Eating half a large pizza didn't help. It gave him nightmares every time. Hello, he struggled to get the words out. "Wake up," a woman screamed in his ear. "We have a job for you downtown." It took a moment to realize it was Margaret from the employment agency. There was no way he could work today. He just wanted to sleep. Well, throw up, then sleep. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of drunken celebrations of his divorce. Celebration. Drowning his sorrows. Either way, he couldn't remember the last time he'd gotten a good night's sleep. Margaret proceeded to give directions, rapid fire, to his latest assignment at a downtown law firm. Be there by 8:30. He glanced at the clock next to his bed. 7:53. His apartment was just 8 miles from downtown, in a surprisingly quiet suburb on the west side called Palms. Still, with the morning rush hour, there was no way he'd get to work on time. He arrived an hour late at Thompson and Duchinsky, T10D. They were on the 23rd floor of the same building where the old TV show LA Law supposedly took place. Hurrying out of the elevator, glad to be off it, he stepped into the lobby and staggered up to the reception desk. Dobie Picorni, word processor, he announced his arrival in a croaking half-whisper. The receptionist, a large young brunette woman, with her hair pulled back, made a point of ignoring him as she shuffled through a stack of papers. She was clipping them together with those huge black binder clips and setting them to her right. He cleared his throat and repeated himself, being sure to enunciate. The woman shuffled and clipped a few more papers for good measure, then looked up to see who she was ignoring. With bags under his half-closed eyes, an unruly lock of auburn hair sticking out just above his left ear, stood Dobie leaning on her desk for support, looking as bad as he felt. A sneer formed on the woman's face, and she snapped, "Don't lean on the desk." He stepped back. She did a double take, adopted a more friendly tone, and asked, "Don't I know you?" He raised an eyebrow and tried to focus on her. She did look familiar. The brass nameplate on her desk said, Venelia Dumas. An unusual name, but not familiar. Dobie shook his head. "Don't think so." Almost gawking now, she asked dreamily, Has anyone ever told you that you have a dark blue aura? No. Her dreaminess then disappeared as soon as it had appeared. Have a seat, Mr. Picorni. Dobie Picorni, he began. Word processor, yeah, she finished for him. With pursed lips and a twinkle in her eyes, she added, how does it feel having your job title the same as the software you use? I don't follow. You are a word processor, and you use a word processor. I'm not just a word processor, he said. I'm a legal secretary, but… A male secretary? Yeah. I get that a lot, so I just say word process. I'll call Ms. Trammell, she cut him off. He rolled his eyes and made himself comfortable in a plush burgundy leather chair across from Venelia. She kept a watchful eye while speaking in hushed tones over the phone with Ms. Trammell. His chair made a nice squeaky leathery sound as he moved around in it. He smiled and closed his eyes. Ms. Trammell. The next thing Dobie knew, Venelia was yelling at him. I said, Ms. Trammell will be with you shortly. Dobie jumped up and looked around. Thank you. He wondered how long he'd been asleep. A few minutes later, Ms. Trammell charged into the reception area and greeted him with a winning smile and firm handshake. Patty Trammell, Human Resources, she said, pumping his hand vigorously. Dobie appraised her while she pumped. She was familiar somehow. Brunette. Late 30s, early 40s. A dozen years his senior. Attractive in a stiff, professional sort of way. We're happy to have you, she said, though you're a little late. She glanced at her watch. I got here as soon as I could. He struggled for a plausible excuse. Traffic was bad. 'Cause of an accident. That was a lie. The only accident was accepting this assignment. Venelia was late this morning, too. Weren't you, Venelia? Yes, Miss Trammell. Venelia sounded like a chastised grade schooler. Maybe you two can work together and solve that problem? Dobie wondered how that would work. They weren't carpool buddies. Venelia was clearly embarrassed. Well, never mind, Miss Trammell said finally. You're both here now, and that's all that matters. She paused, cocked her head to one side and asked Dobie, have we met? The knot in his stomach returned. It occurred to him she and Venelia might have been at one of his recent parties. He could only hope he hadn't said or done anything too disgusting. Or if he had, he hoped they enjoyed it. He then realized she was wearing the same blazer, skirt, and blouse as the blonde woman in last night's dream. His response to her now was a weak smile and shrug of the shoulders. Words eluded him. She stared a moment longer before continuing. Anyway, call me Patty. Everyone's on a first-name basis here. We're not one of those stuffy law firms you may have worked at before. She pulled an adhesive paper label out of her suit pocket, wrote Dobie's name on it with a black marker, peeled away its backing, and attached it to his jacket's left lapel. She rubbed it on with a certain enjoyment in her eyes. He wondered if she was hitting on him. Was okay with it if she was. This way, everyone knows your name, she finished with a satisfied smile. If they don't already, he muttered. What's that? Nothing. Follow me, please, she smiled with a glance at Venelia. Dobie followed Ms. Trammell's glance and saw Venelia seething in silence. Whether it was jealousy over his exchange with Ms. Trammell or the sting of being publicly called out for lateness, he couldn't tell. Whatever it was, there was a palpable volatility behind her eyes. Ms. Trammell led the march quickly and efficiently to his cubicle where she introduced him to his desk, chair, and PC. He stared at the chair. It looked comfortable. Probably not as good as the leather one in the reception area, but still. After a moment, he realized she was speaking to him. But he's not here today. When he returns tomorrow, you will report to him. You can use today to get acclimated. Dobie nodded, with no idea what he was agreeing to. She pulled him down the hall for a tour of the floor. Taking the typically short, precise steps of a woman in 3-inch heels, Ms. Trammell pointed out landmarks and points of interest along the way. It was all too fast, but he plodded along gamely, wondering where the coffee machine was. When they finally reached the employee lounge, she placed a friendly hand on his shoulder. Now he was sure she was hitting on him. With a smile, she said something about pouring himself a cup. I think you need it. He hadn't heard the entire sentence. All that registered was her hand on his shoulder, her alluring scent and smile, the smell of coffee, and the command to pour himself a cup. She reached up, pulled a company-logoed mug from the cupboard and, still smiling, handed it to him. While Dobie poured his coffee, Nectar of the Gods, a tall, distinguished, gray-haired gentleman, stuck his head in and mumbled something in Miss Trammell's ear. She jumped as if bitten, her demeanor completely changed. Agitated now, she barked at Dobie, "Wait right here. I'll be back in a minute." With one last glance over her shoulder on her way out, she said, "Don't go anywhere." Dobie nodded sleepily and did as he was told, taking a seat in the lounge. He sipped on his nectar while awaiting further instructions. There was not much to do but inspect the room. Black and white photographs ranging from 8 by 10 inches to roughly 4 by 3 feet. He knew nothing about art but guessed these pieces were in the avant-garde genre. That's French, he reminded himself. The one with the Eiffel Tower in the background was his first clue. A striking light-skinned young black woman in a tight white dress entered the room. She belonged to an entirely different genre, but a work of art nonetheless. He almost spilled his coffee. "Hi," he said, more awake. She gave him a bored half-glance, but otherwise ignored him and lit a cigarette. California had long ago mandated smoke-free buildings, but that didn't seem to apply here. Being lawyers, Dobie guessed they found a loophole. Any offices above a certain number of floors could designate a smoking room, maybe. Taking a long drag off her cancer stick, Smoking Hot Girl moved toward the window and stared down at the pedestrians and snarled traffic below. Dobie said, "I thought smoking indoors was banned a long time ago." "It was," she said without turning away from the window. "So how?" "The man who was just here, Mr. Duchinsky, is a named partner." She smiled thinly and turned toward him. "He's besties with the mayor. Got the city to officially register this room as a cigar lounge." Corruption," Dobie sighed. "Should have known." "Well, you shouldn't smoke those things." Smoking Hot Girl stared at him from across the small room. She shook her head, extinguished her cigarette, and left without another word. "That went well," he said to no one. Vanillia and Cassie. Dobie thought about following Cassie out, but remembered Ms. Trammell's explicit orders. Wait in the lounge. Half an hour later, he could wait no longer and went in search of his cubicle, only to end up in the reception area. Vanillia stood and shouted at him from 2 feet away. "Hey!" He winced. "You were supposed to wait in the lounge." He gave her his best lost puppy look. "It's okay," she said more softly. "I won't tell." Too loud again, she added. "But now I remember where I've seen you before." Dobie tensed. "Look, it was just a party. Things happen. Don't hold it against me." "What are you talking about?" She shook her head and asked, "Do you ever hang out on Hollywood Boulevard?" Hollywood Boulevard conjured up images of hookers, transvestites, and drug addicts. "Not as a rule, no." "I sold you a book," she said cheerfully. He stared blankly. "Dynametrics, the metric science of human dynamics," she replied. "Remember?" He did remember. Its followers called themselves dynamos. He would have preferred her as a transvestite. He only bought the book to make her go away. It was a couple of months ago when Dobie and his now ex-girlfriend, Kim, were in one of their reconciliation phases, strolling hand-in-hand down Hollywood Boulevard, doing the town, when Dobie noticed something coming at them from out of the darkness. Concerned for her safety, he valiantly pushed Kim out of harm's way, into the gutter, unfortunately, and instinctively reached behind to protect his wallet. When Vanillia Dumas came fully into view, Dobie realized her intent was not to rob him, but to sell him one of those stupid dynamo books. Since he had his hand on his wallet anyway, he bought a copy and told her to go away. Checking out his new purchase, he flipped the book over. The childish cover art, a poorly drawn man surrounded by starbursts, and a halo, a human dynamo, he supposed, evoked disdain. "Hey, babe," he turned to Kim. "Look at this stupid." He stopped when he saw her getting back up and wiping herself off. She had the most hateful look. She was not unattractive, except when making that face. Through clenched teeth, she seethed. "It's a good thing you bought that book, Dobie." "Why's that?" "Because now you'll have something to do the rest of the night. You and I are through." She marched 2 blocks back to their car while Dobie bounced up and down alongside her, apologizing. When they reached the car, she flung the door open, jumped in and snapped, "Give me your keys." He handed her the entire set, including the apartment and mailbox keys, which he now regretted. He felt bad for pushing her into the gutter but thought he was protecting her from a mugger. It was heroic, but she never gave him the chance to explain. The tires squealed as she gunned the engine and pulled out. In the wake of her exhaust and bits of gravel, he watched her disappear into the night, knowing it was forever this time. He spent that night on the neighbor's couch. The next morning he found his car, with the keys in the ignition, sitting in its assigned parking spot. It was a miracle it hadn't been stolen. Kim was long gone. "So, how do you like it?" Vanillia was asking now, hoping for an endorsement. "What?" Dobie jumped. "How do you like the book?" Oh, he searched for words. "It has an interesting cover." And he hurried off in the direction of his desk. Several hours later, on his way for his fourth or fifth cup of coffee, Dobie took a detour into the office supply room. He liked to keep up with the latest office supplies technology. Maybe steal a few pens. He was in the pen and pencil section, inspecting the inventory, when he noticed smoking hot girl next to the pencil sharpener, watching him. Was this where she worked? Not a mere secretary, she was in charge of office supplies, too. She looked good. Even better now that he was wide awake and able to focus. He played it cool, checking out this box of staples and that box of paper clips, biding his time for the right moment to make his move. After long and deep internal consultation, he came up with, "So, what's your name?" "Brilliant," he berated himself. "Cassie," she eyed him warily. "Dobie," he began, taking a wary step forward, only to be interrupted by one of the firm's lawyers entering the room. "Hey, Cass," said the newcomer. "Chad," she smiled coolly. Lawyers reminded Dobie of car salesmen. The only difference between the two professions, as far as he was concerned, was their level of formal education. The worst thing was that they were almost always movie star good-looking. The young ones like Chad anyway. Tall, chiseled, not a hair out of place. How am I supposed to get a girl with these guys running around? His only consolation was knowing that those who made a lifelong career of lawyering usually ended up looking like gargoyles. Ignoring Dobie, Chad eyeballed Cassie and flashed a wolfish grin. She smiled back and, while Dobie looked on jealously, began some sort of mating ritual. First, she stuck the end of a pencil in her mouth and bit lightly on the eraser, spinning it ever so gently with her fingertips. Chad said something. Cassie said something back, then thrust her hips to the right and wobbled her foot, left to right. Any minute now, she'll start doing the hokey pokey. Just when Dobie thought she'd finished her dance, she added a gentle caressing and massaging of the pencil sharpener, slowly moving her hand back and forth across the top, around the sides and down the stem. It was the most erotic use of a pencil sharpener Dobie had ever seen. "Tonight. 7:30, the lawyer said simply, confidently. "Make it 8 o'clock, she said, almost yanking the pencil sharpener off its base, "and it's a date." The lawyer nodded, smiled, and glided toward the exit. Stopping to grab a handful of pens, he smirked at Dobie and said, "And that's how it's done." Dobie knew how it was done, but, being a temp, the new guy, he didn't come right out and call him an asshole. "First time you got it right?" Dobie smirked. "Congratulations." Chad returned an open-mouthed glare but walked away. With the lawyer gone and her hands still on the pencil sharpener, Cassie slowly turned her attention back to Dobie. She looked flushed. He tried to duck out without a word, but ran into Vanillia Dumas literally in the doorway. "Hey, watch where you're going," she shrieked. "Sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going. I just said that." "Yeah, okay," Dobie replied vaguely and attempted to get past her and out the door. She grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him roughly to one side. She was almost as tall as him, and much stronger than she looked. He might have fought back but was raised to never hit a girl. Besides, he was taken by surprise, was still hungover, not at his best. Even his ex never did this. Probably would have if she could, but she was small and slight of build. He glanced over at Cassie for help, but none was forthcoming. She watched with amusement as Vanillia bandied him about. Vanillia abruptly let go of his shirt and apologized for her outburst. "I'm sorry. I've been under some stress lately." Dobie mumbled, "Oh, it was nothing." And not wanting to excite her further, he refrained from straightening out his shirt or making any other sudden moves. "Well, I just wanted to apologize." "It's okay." Just don't let it happen again. He made a nervous stab at humor. Bad move. Vanelia's back stiffened. Her arm shot out with lightning speed, and again she gripped his arm with all her strength as a snarl contorted her face. Wincing with pain, Dobie said, "Kidding. Just kidding." To prove it, he laughed. It was forced and his voice croaked slightly. But it was a laugh, and she fell for it. She loosened her grip, and in a stilted, halting sort of way, she laughed too. They were laughing together now. Even Cassie giggled. They were laughing as one. They were all one with the universe. That's what Vanelia thought anyway. Dobie just wanted to get out of there. "Let's go to an event tonight," she suggested excitedly, now that they were all so chummy. Cassie quickly turned away and pretended to take inventory of her many office supplies. "An event?" Dobie asked. "What kind of event?" He could guess it was one of her dynamo functions. "Oh, a bunch of friends just get together and talk and stuff." She tried to make it sound like a party. "A boring party." He edged his way toward the door. "I can't make it tonight," he lied. "Cassie and I have plans. Maybe some other time?" "In your dreams." Cassie laughed as he escaped down the hall. "With him gone," she said to Vanelia, "I have plans and he might have plans. But, trust me, they're not together." Vanelia nodded. That made more sense. Once home from work, Dobie heated up a can of beef stew and scarfed it down. Flipping the TV on, he came upon a love connection/dating game type of show that he never watched. He flipped past it, only to return after catching a glimpse of a woman who looked just like Kim, his ex-girlfriend. With his mouth agape, Dobie realized it was his ex-girlfriend. This woman just continued to haunt him. He watched in horror as she happily explained to the show's smarmy host how a date once pushed her into the gutter and left her there. "I didn't just leave you there." Dobie stood up and shouted at the television. "The worst date of my life," she added with a sigh. The studio audience sighed with her. "That's horrible," the game show host empathized. "I'm sure the man you picked tonight can do better." Dobie's ex and her audience heartily agreed. Dobie switched the television off. He didn't want to see who her next date would be. He felt sick. As if things weren't bad enough, now she was embarrassing him on national television. He couldn't stand it. He needed to see who she picked. He flipped the TV back on and instantly regretted it. She picked a disgustingly handsome Greek god type, probably a lawyer, as if to say, "See, Dobie? I only date gorgeous men now. I'm so much better off now." He knew that he was better off but didn't want her feeling good about it. She was supposed to mourn his loss for the rest of her dating life. He needed to talk to someone. Anyone. His friends Cheryl and Christian, on whose couch he had spent that fateful night, were out. They were leaving as he came home. Digging out his little black book, he made a few calls. Several voicemails later, he came to the unhappy conclusion that he didn't have a friend in the world. None available anyway. He grabbed his favorite black leather jacket, hustled out the front door, jumped into his car, and wandered aimlessly along the never-ending Los Angeles freeway system. It was something to do. He ended up on Hollywood Boulevard in front of the Dynamo Center, Vanelia Dumas's church. As luck would have it, there was an open parking spot right in front. She would later say this was proof that their lives were cosmically intertwined. The event. As Dobie got out of his car, some freak accosted him. It was a dynamo trying to get him inside the center. Dobie brushed him aside and stood with his hands on his hips in front of the building entrance, asking himself if he really wanted to go in. From inside, Vanelia spotted him and ran out to greet him. She gushed enthusiastically and talked him into going inside. She asked him to sign the guest list, but, not wanting to be on their mailing list, Dobie begged off. Taking a look around the place, he realized he was standing in the foyer of a formerly grand hotel, now gone to pot along with the rest of Hollywood. On its walls were nothing but photos of the Dynamo founder, Elroy Smith, in various poses, with his bulging, narrow-set eyes, bulldog jowls, and just a hint of a chin that accentuated his oversized nose. Mr. Smith was not a handsome man. But that wasn't his role. His role was that of a wise, benevolent father figure. Dobie wasn't given much time to study his surroundings as Vanelia insisted on escorting him to the event room. "It's about to start," she giggled. "What's about to start?" She never answered as she led him into a large room, Probably used to be the dining room of the old hotel, now filled with row upon row of tan metal fold-up chairs, most of them empty. She seated him in the front row with the other 3 people in the room, then made an excuse and left him there. Dobie immediately abandoned his assigned spot and found a seat in the very back of the room. He kicked his feet up onto the chair in front of him and waited for the show to begin. He had no clue what was going to happen, but judging by the podium up front and portable movie screen behind that, he guessed there would be a speech or slideshow or both. He could hardly wait. Probably somebody's vacation slides. Over the next few minutes, dozens of people were escorted in. And that's when Venelia reappeared wearing her pious and blissful look. She makes a great usher. He smiled and waved. She frowned, either because he'd abandoned the spot she had chosen for him or was engrossed in her ushering. She did eventually crack a thin smile. A dark-haired man in military dress blues entered the room from a side entrance and approached the podium. The chattering crowd quieted down. Venelia and the other ushers positioned themselves in strategic locations around the room and remained standing throughout the event. Footlights came on and illuminated the portable movie screen. The uniformed man stepped in front of it and greeted the crowd with a cheerful hello. To Dobie's surprise, the entire audience gave a hearty hello back. Glowing ethereally from the footlights, the speaker donned a pair of sunglasses and went into an impassioned speech on learning to be one with the universe and making lots of money in the process. Or something like that. Whatever the speaker said after the first couple of minutes, Dobie could not remember. He had stopped listening. He was more interested in the various members of the audience, specifically a gorgeous redhead in the front row. She was a favorite of the speaker, too, for he spent most of his time speaking directly to her and smiling coolly behind his dark glasses. After the speaker finished his presentation, members of the audience stood up one by one to confess their sins and celebrate their wins. That's when Dobie stood up and turned to leave. "Yes, sir. And what do you have to tell us?" said the man at the podium. Dobie had a bad feeling turning back toward the audience. Yep. The speaker was addressing him. "Oh, Dobie fumbled. I was just leaving." The man at the podium was irritatingly persistent, like most dynamos. "Surely you have a win or two you can share with us?" "No, I don't," Dobie said. "I've led a very dull, winless life." He bolted into the aisle and walked briskly toward the rear exit. The crowd cheered. On the edge of his peripheral vision, he saw a hazy blue figure. Human or otherwise, he could not be sure. Like a distant star in the corner of his eye, it disappeared when he tried to focus on it. "This is all just too weird," he said to no one and melted through the door before the mob behind him sacrificed him to the gods or something. He would have to tell Venelia next time he saw her exactly what he thought of her religion and fellow religiates. Sometime in the middle of the night, Dobie awoke on the floor of a strange apartment, with no idea how he got there. He heard the sound of a shower going. He wanted to get up but couldn't. So he lay back on the floor. A few minutes later, he tried again and was able to prop himself up on his elbows. He then noticed he was naked. A few minutes later, he was on his feet and wandering into the fogged-up bathroom. He could see the shape of someone through the smoke-glass shower doors. Standing at the toilet, wondering whose bathroom he was in and who was in the shower, its door opened and Venelia Dumas stuck her head out. "Well, hello there," she said, casually appraising his naked body. "Care to join me?" With his head throbbing and mind reeling, he stepped toward the shower. He slipped on the wet floor, hit his head and knocked himself out. When he came to a few hours later, Venelia was gone. She'd left a note. "Borrowed your car. Love, Venelia." Love, Venelia? Oh God. She was gone. That was the important thing. He could always get another car. For now, he would have to catch a cab to work. Rummaging through her kitchen, he found what he needed for a cup of instant coffee. Hazy, slightly frightening images from last night came to him as he boiled the water. How could he have slept with Venelia? Did he have sex with her? Yes, he now remembered, he did. He vaguely recalled that while escaping the Dynamo Center, Venelia followed him to his car and invited him out for a drink. She wanted to apologize for abandoning him earlier. He was surprised she drank, being a religious fanatic. But she did, and they did at a hole-in-the-wall dive across from the Dynamo building. With Vanilla buying, Dobie decided to get stinking drunk again. At one point, she looked him in the eye and said, "Ever had sex with a dynamo?" She was a large woman, big-boned, pleasantly plump, with large brown eyes and a pretty enough face when she smiled, if you could pry one out of her. That night, though, she had a deadly seriousness about her, a certain crazed look in her eyes. Dobie knew he'd better do whatever she said. Day 2. His second day at T-Tandy was interesting. Upon arrival, he was met by Ms. Trammell saying, "Vanilla hasn't shown up for work yet. Could you sit at reception until she gets here? You might be replacing her permanently if she keeps this up." He didn't like that word permanently, but agreed to play receptionist for now. "Hasn't shown up for work yet? She borrowed my car." "Where is she?" "Ms." Trammell started to walk away, then turned and asked, "Isn't that the same thing you wore yesterday?" "Yeah," he shrugged. "Temps." She shook her head and left the room. Vanilla was called into the Dynamo Center first thing in the morning to meet with its leader, Elroy Smith. She now sat in blissful obedience in the waiting room outside the great man's office. When his door opened, it triggered floodlights overhead, creating an ethereal glow like that man in dress blues did at last night's talk. A handsome young male assistant dressed in white took Vanilla's elbow and guided her, still half blinded by the floodlights, into Smith's lair. He sat her down in a blue upholstered chair. Smith gave her eyes a moment to adjust, smiled, and pointed at the weapons cache to her right. Her eyes lit up at the variety of guns, plastic explosives, even a flamethrower. "You said last night," Smith began, "that you were ready to complete your mission. Are you ready to make that law firm pay for their frivolous lawsuits and harassment?" "Yes, my lord," Vanilla said. "I am ready. The time has come." Dobie was at the reception desk, minding his own business, letting the phone ring off the hook. No one ever showed him how to transfer a call. After answering those first few calls and failing to transfer them to their intended recipient, he gave up. He figured there was some sort of voicemail system. Whoever came in later and listened to those messages could deal with it. When 2 paramedics stepped out of the elevator and approached him, he tried to ignore them as Vanilla had done to him the day before. They wouldn't go away. "Must be a trick to it I haven't figured out yet." Without looking up, he asked, "Can I help you?" "As a matter of fact, yes," said one of the men. The other man stepped to one side and stood with his hands folded across his chest. "Is there some sort of emergency?" Dobie asked the paramedic standing in front of the desk. "Nothing like that," the man said. "I was just wondering if you could tell me how many lawyers it takes to screw in a light bulb." "What?" Dobie shook his head. He never got a reply. The second man pulled out a handkerchief and sneezed. Only, instead of putting the hanky to his own nose, he placed it over Dobie's. Dobie inhaled instinctively, and that was all they needed. He was immediately lightheaded and dizzy. The men each grabbed one of Dobie's arms, pulled him out of his chair, and dragged him into the elevator. In the elevator stood a young woman, also wearing a bogus paramedic's uniform, holding the door open with one hand and clutching a wheeled stretcher with the other. Once she let the door close, Dobie felt a stabbing sensation in his butt. Aside from a fleeting mental note to stay off elevators from now on, that was the last thing he remembered. He was unconscious by the time they strapped him onto the stretcher. On their way down, one man asked the other, "Are you sure we got the right person?" "What do you mean?" "I figured the receptionist would be a girl, is all." "There's no rule," the woman chimed in, "that says a receptionist has to be a woman." The men ignored her. "Hey," the second man continued, "they said grab the receptionist." "That's what we did." "What's the problem?" "None, I guess." When the elevator reached street level, they wheeled Dobie's stretcher quickly across the courtyard into a waiting ambulance. There were numerous passers-by looking on, but no one knew or cared that Dobie was being kidnapped. Kidnapped? Vanilla didn't care that Dobie was being kidnapped. She was across the street awaiting the walk signal, ignoring the ambulance completely. Dynamos are taught to ignore unpleasant things. Unpleasant thoughts ruin one's outlook on life. Had she looked, she might have recognized Dobie, but she never did. She walked into the office, set her backpack full of weaponry down at her feet, and took a seat at the reception desk. When Miss Trammell appeared several minutes later wanting to know where Dobie was, Vanilla shrugged and said, "In his cubicle, I guess." "You're half an hour late, Vanilla, miss." Trammell was agitated. "We've talked about this." Venelia forced a meek, contrite face, but said nothing. "Forcing me to put temps like Dobie with no receptionist experience at reception ain't gonna cut it." Venelia made a face at the mention of Dobie sitting in for her. She apologized and promised it would never happen again. "Final warning, Venelia. Right back at ya." Venelia smoldered in silence. It wasn't until Dobie awoke in a strange room on a strange couch that he was told he had been kidnapped for his own good. The man doing the explaining was a short, balding man with a goatee. Dobie surveyed his surroundings as the man spoke. They were in a very nice office with wood-paneled walls, dated, but nice, a large cherrywood desk, and an ornate Persian rug covering half of the hardwood floor. On the wall behind the desk was a poster with the name Jumpstarters in large bold print at the top. Underneath that was a black and white photograph of a monocled, bearded hypnotist holding a stopwatch, presumably swaying, in front of an open-mouthed young subject. Superimposed over the photo was the international symbol for Not Allowed, a red circle with a diagonal line through it. Underneath that was the Jumpstarters motto, "We're the good guys." Dobie guessed the man addressing him was a doctor. Psychiatrist, maybe. On the wall to the right was an 8x10 glossy of him with the mayor and what looked like Duchinsky of T10D. "Cigarette?" the doctor asked, pulling 2 Dunhills from a gold-plated case. "No, thanks, I quit." Dobie rubbed his temples and wondered why he was so drowsy. He looked around the room for possible escape routes. "Do you mind if I smoke?" the doctor asked. "Well, actually," Dobie began, then didn't care enough to finish the thought. He slumped heavily into the deeply cushioned couch. "I would like to start," the doctor began the interview, "with a little bit of background information. First of all, what is your name?" "Dobie Picorni, word processor," he replied automatically. "Dobie? Is that a nickname?" "No, it's my name," he said. It was short for Dobrumer, but he didn't feel like explaining. The doctor furrowed his brow, picked up a manila folder, and studied the documents within. "So you prefer the name Dobie then?" the doctor asked. "Would you prefer another name?" No, of course not." The doctor spoke in soothing, measured tones and scribbled a note to himself in the manila folder. Setting the folder down only to replace it with a clipboard, he continued the interview. "Would you describe yourself as a happy person?" the doctor asked. Dobie stared blankly at him. "Huh. Happy," he repeated, taking a drag off his cigarette and staring at its ember as he twirled it between his fingers. "Are you a happy person? What the hell is this?" Dobie shouted, or thought he shouted. Whatever was making him so drowsy took all the force from his voice. He attempted to rise from the couch but could not gather enough strength and collapsed back into it. Now, Dobie, just relax. Just a few more questions, then you can be on your way. Okay? Okay." Crossing his legs and taking up the clipboard and pen like a secretary about to take dictation, the doctor resumed the interrogation. "Where were you at 10 o'clock on the night of February 30th? Huh. Dobie winced, wondering if this was another one of his stupid dreams. "It wasn't." "Just kidding," the doctor laughed. "I like to ask that to break the ice." Dobie shook his head. "Maybe I will have that cigarette." The doctor handed him one, lit it for him, and continued the interview. "I will be asking these questions quickly," he explained. "You just need to nod your head yes or no. Got it?" When Dobie only stared at him with the cigarette hanging limp out the corner of his mouth, the doctor continued. "Number 1. When you see a telephone cord all twisted up into a knot, do you feel the need to untangle it?" Dobie replied. Lacking the energy to take the cigarette out of his mouth, it slurred his speech. "If you notice dirt under your fingernails, do you clean them?" "Usually," he mumbled. "If you saw someone crossing the street about to be hit by a car, would you shout a warning, B, run for help, C, call the police, or D, just watch?" "Just watch," Dobie sneered. The drugs were wearing off and he was getting surly. "What do you want more than anything else in the world?" "The perfect wave," Dobie replied with a wicked grin. He liked that one. Would have to remember that for his next interrogation. He dropped his cigarette onto the Persian rug and stamped it out with his foot. The doctor stared, horrified, but before he could protest, a bushy-haired man in a suit and tie barged into the room. "Who the hell is this?" The man pointed at Dobie. Vanilia Dumas, I'm told. The doctor explained, though he prefers to be called Dobie. That's probably his real name, the bushy-haired man screamed. Vanilia Dumas is a woman. Whoever he is, get him out of here. He paused at the doorway, turned back to the doctor and whispered in his ear, and make him forget he was ever here. Always, said the doctor. When Dobie came to, he found himself underneath some bushes in the hills above Hollywood. He got up, dusted himself off, and noticed several cigarette burn holes down the length of his pants. What the? Looking at his watch, it wasn't there, but he was too disoriented to care all that much. It was a cheap watch. Judging by the position of the sun, he guessed it was mid-afternoon. What day? He had no idea. His wallet was also missing. This was more distressing. Frantically checking his pockets, front and back, he discovered a few loose paper clips, the cap to a ballpoint pen, and 53 cents in change. No wallet. He clawed his way through the bushes and down the hill. With his hair disheveled, his tie loose around his neck, and pants full of tiny burn holes, he straggled down the street to the nearest bus stop. There, he talked an old lady on the bench into giving him the other 50 cents he needed for bus fare back home. She agreed on the condition that he not board the same bus as she. So, you say you were drugged and kidnapped? Margaret from the temp agency was now asking over the phone, but you don't know by whom. You don't know where they took you. And you were released unharmed, somewhere in the hills above Hollywood. Is that what you're telling me? Dobie was sitting in his apartment, on the edge of his bed, phone in one hand, glass of orange juice in the other. Yeah, that's basically it. And you expect me to believe that? She shrieked. It's the truth. Dobie croaked and set his juice down on the nightstand. Margaret sighed deeply and said, Dobie, I've dealt with all kinds in this business, but you take the cake. Don't bother calling us for any more temp assignments. Before he could respond, she hung up. So, Dobie had blown it with yet another temp agency. It was not the first time, and would not be the last. Too bad, too. He'd been thinking of asking her out. Flopping down on the bed for some much-needed rest, he resolved to find a new temp agency first thing in the morning. Then he remembered Vanilia still had his car. He thought about reporting it stolen, but didn't want to get her into trouble. That night, technically the next morning, Vanilia showed up at Dobie's door, wearing a fisherman's hat replete with fishhooks and a dark blue trench coat. Half asleep and still in his underwear, he thought nothing of her strange attire. They're after me, Dobie, she hissed and pushed her way inside. But there's no time to talk. She pushed him onto the bed. He happily fell back asleep. She didn't let him sleep long, taking off all her clothes and jumping into bed with him. Before he knew what was happening, they were having sex. He'd had imaginary sex in dreams, of course, but to have actual sex while still asleep was something new. It wasn't long before he was an enthusiastic participant. He wondered what color his aura was now. Afterward, he fell quickly back to sleep. A couple hours later, she was on top of him again, wanting more. He groaned and performed as best he could. Around 8 that morning, to Dobie's complete shock and disgust, a man from another temp agency called to say they had a temp assignment for him. It was at another law firm, but at least it was on this side of town. This is strictly a day-to-day thing, the man said. That went without saying. Every job was day-to-day for Dobie. After hanging up the phone, he realized Vanilia was nowhere to be found. That was fine. If she was around, she would have wanted more sex. The problem was that she still had his car. On the bus ride to this next temp assignment, Dobie listened to the news coming out of a fellow passenger's phone. The fire, said the newsreader, that swept through the 23rd and 24th floors of the 444 South Flower building yesterday has been officially deemed arson. It appears to have been started by get this, or a flamethrower. How they can deduce that, well, I'm sure that's a trade secret. But for you firebugs out there, watch out. These investigators know what they're doing. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. Police are now on the lookout for a large brunette woman seen leaving the scene in a fishing hat and dark blue trench coat. They didn't mention it by name, but Dobie knew T10D was on the 23rd floor of that building. Not sure who was on the one above. He thought of Cassie and that so-called cigar lounge. The fishing hat and overcoat sounded familiar, but he shrugged it off. He hoped Cassie and Ms. Trammell were okay. At the end of the day, he skipped the bus ride home in favor of a nice long walk. It was only a few miles, and after his recent spate of partying, a good long walk would do him good. Turning onto his normally quiet street, proud of himself for such a hike, he found a police barricade around his apartment building. A helicopter buzzed overhead. Law enforcement vehicles of every sort covered the area. It ruined his good mood. "Wanna see my flamethrower?" Dobie's neighbors Cheryl and Christian were on the sidewalk, gawking, when he came up behind them and asked what was going on. "A crazy woman," Cheryl didn't bother turning around, "is threatening to blow up the building." "Which building?" "Our building," she and Christian said in unison. "The one the cops have surrounded," Christian added with a laugh. "They say the woman is in your apartment," Cheryl said. "Why my apartment?" "She's your girlfriend, isn't she?" "I don't really have a girl." Dobie began, dropped it, and approached the closest policeman. He told the officer that his friend, definitely not my girlfriend, was apparently the one in his apartment. He was escorted to the front of the barricade and introduced to the hostage negotiating team, who told him that she was believed to be well armed. The man in charge asked Dobie if he could talk her out of it. "I can try." Someone fitted Dobie for a bulletproof vest while the sergeant dialed Dobie's landline. When Vanelia answered, the sergeant handed Dobie the phone. "You're up." Dobie took the phone and said hello. "Oh, hi, Dobie," Vanelia said casually. "Hey," he tried to match her tone. "What's going on?" "I'm going to blow up the building." "Yeah, I heard." "Why?" "Why not?" He had no answer for that. "Okay, but why all of a sudden?" "I mean, why now? The day after I'm blowing up the building now." She didn't want to hear it and hung up. "Wait," he shouted, too late. "She's gonna blow up the building now," he relayed the message. Everyone braced for impact. When it didn't happen immediately, Dobie did something brave/stupid. He climbed over the barricade of patrol cars and walked into the apartment building's courtyard. Moving slowly, he got close enough to see Vanelia through the upstairs window, just to the right of the stairs. He waved. She waved back, looking down, detonator in one hand, Uzi submachine gun in the other. "Hey, Vanelia," Dobie said loud enough to be heard through the window. "Can we talk?" Staying inside the apartment, Vanelia opened the door, out of view of police, and said, "What now?" "Why?" Dobie asked simply, holding his arms out in the universal body language that asks, "Why?" "Did you hear about Thompson burning down?" she asked. "Yeah. That was me." "Yeah, I figured." He forced a laugh. She smiled, proud of herself. "I hate to keep asking this," he continued, "but why? What did they ever do to you?" "They fired me," she spat. "That's what they did to me. Sorry to hear that, but they fired me too. I guess technically the temp agency fired me, but you don't see me putting a flamethrower to the place." "You were just a temp," she spat again. "Hey. So I torched the place. The dynamos teach us to take care of our problems. The importance of justice and retribution. Balance." Her face lit up and she added, "Wanna see my flamethrower?" "Huh." Dobie laughed. "I've used that line. I've got all kinds of neat stuff here," she ignored him. "Plastic explosives, hand grenades, the flamethrower, this Uzi." Like the first time they met, when she mentioned his aura, the light in her eyes disappeared as soon as it had appeared. This was followed by an unbearable silence. Dobie tried to fill the silence with conversation. "So, you're gonna blow up my apartment." He never was good at small talk. "Yeah," she giggled. He looked back at the police barricade. Several officers were gesturing for him to retreat to a safe distance. One was pointing at her watch. Dobie ignored them. "Where'd you get all that weaponry?" he asked Vanelia. "The Dynamo Center," she said. "They keep it for protection." "I guess they are in a pretty rough neighborhood," Dobie reasoned weakly. After another pregnant pause, Dobie said, Vanelia? Yeah. If you're gonna blow the place up, could you maybe throw a couple of my things down first?" She stared blankly at him. "Are you serious?" He nodded. She rolled her eyes. "Like what?" "My leather jacket for one." "I guess so." "Sure. And maybe the computer?" "It's almost new, and—" She shook her head and disappeared into the apartment. Afraid she might return with that flamethrower blazing, He took a few steps toward the courtyard exit. She returned with his jacket in one hand, Uzi in the other. Hey, where are you going? Nowhere. He held up his hands, as one does when held at gunpoint. Here's your jacket. She tossed it down, again careful not to show herself to police sharpshooters, if there were any. Thanks. He forced enthusiasm, like a dynamo, as he put it on. You can say goodbye to your computer, she said. Is there, any beer in the fridge? He asked, and meant it. I'm getting thirsty. She rolled her eyes again. Never mind. But, seriously, you don't have to do this. I've got no choice. You've got your whole life ahead of you. He hated to sound so trite, but it's all he could think to say. A life behind bars, she laughed bitterly. I can't go back to prison, Dobie. Do you know what they do to people in prison? I've heard stories, Dobie shrugged. But how many years would a person do for arson, really? 5? With time off for good behavior, you'll probably do 2 max. Working in law firms, I've learned that much. Venelia scoffed. Goodbye, Dobie. I've got things to do. When he didn't move, she raised the Uzi at him. Okay, see you later, he backed away. I doubt it. He was almost out of the courtyard when she shouted after him. Hey, Dobie? Yeah. Thanks again for last night. Maybe I will see you sooner than later. She tossed out what looked like a rock. Dobie caught it and looked at it. It wasn't a rock. It was a hand grenade. He screeched and tossed it high into the air. Realizing it would land on top of him, or close enough, he made a dash for the police barricade. He was halfway there when the blast sent him flying into the front end of a police car. He squeezed between it and another vehicle as the explosions came one after the other. Several apartment units, with his at the epicenter, evaporated behind him. When the explosions stopped, he turned and asked anyone with eardrums still intact. One hand grenade did all that. Judging by the smell, the sergeant behind him said, I'd say Semtex did that. Dobie's neighbor Christian had a wealthy friend in Beverly Hills, surged somebody, who said they could stay at his place. The guy was almost never there, and Christian had a key. Cheryl insisted that Dobie tag along. It was the least they could do, she said, after his bravery at the apartment. More like stupidity, Christian muttered. Dobie claimed the backyard guest cottage for himself. Cheryl said there were rooms available in the main house, but Dobie insisted. As he familiarized himself with the surge person's mother-in-law cottage out back, he stumbled upon a stash of dynamo materials, stacks of various books and photographs of the head dynamo, Elroy Smith. He wondered what this guy's connection was to Venelia's cult, but was too exhausted at the moment to pursue it. The man's religious proclivities could wait. Dobie took a shower and got into bed. Lying there, looking up at the ceiling, he resolved to stop drinking. Stop getting drunk, at least. If he hadn't been such a drunken fool, he might be in his own bed now. No more sleeping with women he barely knew to. He should find a new line of work. No more temp secretary stuff. Get a real job, a man's job like digging ditches or driving a forklift. Better yet, computer programming. Learn to code, as they say. Then it hit him. Today was his birthday. How could he forget? 28 years old. Dad was right. I should have finished college. Oh well. Happy birthday to me. The front doorknob turned slowly. He hadn't bothered to lock it. The cottage was well hidden, surrounded by the backyard trees. He thought he was safe. Did Venelia survive the blast and follow him here? He sat up, ready to leap out from under the covers. Cheryl appeared in the doorway, her flimsy lingerie billowing in the gentle breeze. The main house's back porch light illuminated her figure through the sheer material. She smiled and locked the door behind her. He knew Cheryl well enough. Besides, it was his birthday. Things were looking up. The end.